Hey guys, tonight we head north, way north, beyond the roads, past the trees, into a world where the air stings just a little and your breath comes out in soft white puffs, like secrets escaping. Tonight, you're not scrolling through your phone or checking your fridge light one last time. You're walking slowly across the frozen tundra, boots squeaking in the snow, following a narrow path toward a small village nestled under the sky's bluest silence. The wind doesn't howl here, it murmurs, and beneath your feet, under the snow-packed ground, lies something ancient and strange, a fish buried in ice. Older than most leftovers deserve to be, and somehow still perfectly edible. You're about to meet the Indigenous Arctic ice cellar, a low-tech marvel that's part refrigerator, part treasure chest, part quiet rebellion against rot and time. Of course, you probably wouldn't survive this. Not the digging, not the temperatures, and definitely not the fermented seal meat. But that's the point, we're just visiting. No pressure to join the village council or chew raw blubber politely. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? And what time is it right now for you? Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge slowly behind an elder. Her parka crinkles gently. Her boots make no sound at all. Around you, the snow is layered in quiet. There are no buzzing streetlights here, no traffic, no rush. She stops near what looks like a small hill of snow, almost like someone buried a boulder. She brushes off the top with gloved hands, revealing a wooden hatch with iron rings so cold they frost the air around them. You help lift the lid carefully and peer into the darkness below. The cold air that escapes is sharp, clean, and tinged with something vaguely fishy. Not bad fishy, just intentional. A breath of centuries-old preservation. This is the ice cellar, known in various Arctic indigenous cultures by many names in Inuktitut. It might be called a kuluak, in Yupik, a kasgik, or a similar variant. This is no ordinary freezer. It's dug deep into the permafrost, a natural refrigeration system that runs on silence and snow. You climb down carefully, following a narrow tunnel carved straight into the frozen earth. The walls glisten faintly with frost. The elder lights a small lamp, and in the flickering glow, you see shelves cut into the sides, all holding carefully wrapped packages, some fish, some meat, all bound in tradition. The temperature is steady, unwavering, just above freezing, perfect for keeping things not quite frozen, but definitely not rotting. Historians still argue whether these storage cellars evolved independently in each community, or whether there was a slow diffusion of techniques passed from one camp to another across miles of ice and snow. Either way, the result is something elegant, a way to keep food edible in a place where the nearest grocery store might be a 2-day sled ride away. And that's if the sled dogs are feeling motivated. Back on the surface, the wind dances around your hood. You look around and see another structure, a similar mound, slightly larger, with a drift of snow, curled like whipped cream against one side. It's someone else's cellar. You realize they're everywhere. Each household, maybe even each extended family, with their own hidden treasure trove beneath the earth. A child runs by, trailing a scarf longer than they are. They wave. You wave back. Your mittens stiff. And you wonder, how do these kids learn to dig with such precision, to recognize when the ice is safe and when it's sulking? Turns out, kids here learn early. Digging your first practice hole is a rite of passage. Not too deep, not too close to the real cellar. You're taught to feel the soil, to smell the frost. It's less follow the blueprint and more listen to the land whispering. If you dig too shallow, the thaw might reach your food in summer. Too deep, and you risk flooding, or worse, breaking into an ancient layer that exhales methane. Fun party trick. Not so fun side effect. You crouch beside another cellar, this one open for airing out. Inside, you see a fish, long and leathery, dried and twisted like an old scroll. This isn't just any fish. It's an echoluk, perhaps, or another local species, prepped in a way that lets it stay preserved for months, sometimes even a year or two. No vacuum seals, no expiration dates, just a mix of ice, airflow, and know-how. And here's the thing, they don't think of it as preserved the way we might. It's just food, kept the way food should be, not rushed, not over-engineered, just buried and blessed. In one corner of the village, you find a newer cellar. Its lid is modern recycled plastic, maybe even a bit of solar-powered lighting nearby. But beneath, the same ice, the same humbling cold. Some families have experimented with insulation materials, corrugated metal, foam panels, even rubber tires blending the old and new like snow over tundra. One elder laughs gently as she tells you how she once caught a fox trying to tunnel in. Too bad for him, she says. He didn't know how to open the lid. There's always a sense of quiet competition over who builds the best cellar. Not loud boasting, just subtle pride. One family's famous cellar stays colder all summer. Another's holds more. And another has the softest landing when you jump down inside. And yes, sometimes you do jump. Remember, though this is survival, not luxury, you can't always eat what you want. Sometimes you eat what's still solid, or what didn't get chewed by an Arctic ground squirrel. Real problem. Apparently, little guys have opinions about seal fat, but even with all that, there's something deeply calming about these cellars. They represent control in an uncontrollable place. A quiet reminder that even when blizzards rage and sun vanishes for weeks, someone still knows where the fish is. You run a hand over the snow. It's not just frozen water. It's history, layered and compacted. The same way these food cellars hold stories not just of how people ate, but how they lived, how they planned, how they waited. And waiting is part of the ritual. You can't rush fermentation, or drying, or even digging. You just wait. The wind blows, the ice settles, and dinner slowly gets ready. You're still standing beside that open ice cellar when the elder taps your arm gently and gestures toward the low sun slanting across the snow. The light here doesn't really rise. It just sort of leans in, makes itself known, and then softens again. It's never urgent. You squint toward the horizon, where distant hills wear snow like old hats. Now it's time to understand why. In a land so harsh, so unyielding, the cold is actually your best friend. Not the kind of friend you'd trust with your secrets or loan your mittens to, but the kind who's always there, unwavering, dependable. Cold doesn't flake out. Cold doesn't oversleep. Cold shows up on time. Every time, and stays well past the end of the party. And here, Indigenous Arctic communities Inuit, Yupik, Chukchi, and others have long known how to work with that friend. You don't fight it. You learn its moods. You understand that it's both the enemy of bacteria and the preserver of feasts. So when food is caught, maybe a seal, maybe a school of fish hauled up through a hole in the ice, you don't panic about spoilage. You trust the land. You bury it deep. You let the cold work its long, slow magic. You shuffle behind another family now. A different house, a different story. Their cellar lid creaks open, revealing a wisp of breath-like air and a low echo, like a sigh. Inside, not much. A few bundles, a well-worn path. Still, the mother beams. The ground never forgets. She says that might sound mystical, but it's also just true. The permafrost is like a stubborn librarian. Once something's filed inside it, it stays there organized by temperature, protected by layers of silence. No password required. Now, you probably think of cold as something to battle. You buy coats. You crank thermostats. You defrost windshields with something close to rage. But out here, cold is simply there. It's the background hum to daily life. And it offers one enormous gift: preservation. Some elders will tell you stories of their own grandparents pulling out meat from a cellar that had been buried for more than a year. Still good, still rich with flavor, though perhaps not the kind of flavor you'd find in a grocery store aisle. Imagine a cross between smoked fish, strong cheese, and a long, thoughtful pause. Historians still argue whether permafrost-based storage emerged purely as a solution to seasonal scarcity, or if it also had ceremonial and cultural meaning from the start. Was the act of burying food part of a larger spiritual rhythm, or simply a practical necessity? Probably both. In Arctic cultures, practicality and ritual often overlap like snowflakes on a sleeve. You follow the trail behind the house now, passing dogs lounging on sunlit snowbanks, their eyes half closed in a kind of canine meditation. A young boy is testing the depth of the snow with a stick, not to play, exactly more like a subtle daily check-in with the land, a way to measure change. That's the thing about living with permafrost. You notice things. A tiny slump in the ground might mean the ice beneath is softening. A new scent in the air could signal fermentation has gone too far. Your senses sharpen, not from paranoia, but from partnership. The cold becomes something you lean into. You breathe with it. You adjust your body, your food, your time, and it's not just about keeping things edible. It's about keeping things yours. These cellars are extensions of family memory. You don't just dig a hole. You maintain a legacy. That spot near the riverbank, that was where your grandmother kept her best walrus meat. The slope behind the third snow fence, perfect airflow for drying fish. Some of the locations are inherited, passed down with the same care as stories or names. Others are improvised, chosen when the permafrost feels right. There's no GPS ping, no measuring tape. Just the weight of experience and the quiet whisper of the ground. You crouch beside one such spot now. It's unmarked, just a slight dip, a patch of disturbed snow. But if you press your palm against it, you'll feel the difference. Colder, firmer, like touching the lid of time. Nearby, a small group is repairing an old cellar. The sides have started to collapse inward, not from negligence, but from natural shifts. Permafrost, after all, is not as permanent as the name suggests, especially now, with warmer temperatures creeping in from the south. But more on that later. Right now, watch how they work. No panic, no rushing, just slow, practiced movements. Snow is packed around the edges. Ice is chipped away where needed. The interior is examined with gentle curiosity, like a doctor checking a very sleepy patient. They don't use power tools, just bone scrapers, wooden boards, and the occasional crowbar with a duct-taped handle. One tool has a carved seal head, at the end a small, personal touch. Even in maintenance, there's room for art. One of the workers stops and looks up at you, smiling. "The cold is our partner," he says. "But she's moody. You have to stay polite." And so you do. You speak quietly here, even laugh softly. The ground listens. The snow shifts slightly beneath you, sighing as if agreeing. The sun is lower now. Not that it ever rose very high, but the blue has deepened into something more velvet-like. Shadows stretch long across the village. People are heading home. Someone has started a small fire more for light than warmth. A faint smell of dried fish and seal oil drifts on the air, rich and earthy, like a lullaby for your nose. You turn once more to the cellar you first visited. The lid is closed now, a light dusting of new snow softening its edges. It could be anything: a snow-covered stump, a lumpy rock. But you know better. Beneath that lid, wrapped in care and calm and cold, is food that may not see daylight for months, maybe longer. Food that rests not just waiting to be eaten, but existing in the patient pause between survival and tradition. And just like that, you begin to understand in a place where everything is moving wind, sky, seasons. The cellar is the still point, the heartbeat under the ice. You wake the next morning, or more accurately, you notice it's morning, because the sky has turned from navy to a lighter kind of gray-blue. The sun hasn't bothered to rise much higher, but it's politely illuminating the snowdrifts like a gentle desk lamp. The wind's taken the day off. A few dogs are curled near their kennels, their noses tucked under fluffy tails. Today, you're digging, not too deep, just enough to feel it. A young girl greets you with a wooden spade in hand. It's smooth from years of use, the handle wrapped in caribou sinew. She hands it over with a smile that says, "You're probably going to mess this up, but I respect the effort." You press the blade into the snow. It resists, at first crunchy, crusted. Then you break through to the soft layers below, the fine stuff that falls silently and packs like powdered sugar. A few more stabs, and the ground gives way to the first layer of frost-crusted earth. And there it is, permafrost. It doesn't look like much as frozen soil, but what you're touching is ground that's been frozen solid for centuries, maybe even millennia. It holds the memory of ancient footfalls, the remnants of old bones, and a temperature so stable you could almost measure time in degrees Celsius. You try to dig deeper, but your hands aren't used to this. Your arms start complaining immediately. The girl laughs kindly and takes the spade back, finishing the work in a few swift movements. She's learned this motion the way others learn to swipe on a phone. It's embedded in muscle memory. The hole she creates is narrow, neat, and surprisingly deep, just wide enough to allow air circulation without risking collapse. At the bottom, you can already feel the cold shift. It gets stiller down there. Colder. Yes, but also quieter, like sound itself freezes at a certain depth. You ask her how she learned. She shrugs. "My grandma showed me." Her hands remembered. This is how it happens. No written manual, just generations of quiet instruction, usually with a side of laughter and the occasional snowball fight when lessons get too serious. You walk with her to another site, a larger dig, in progress. Several older community members are carving out a new cellar for a young couple expecting their first child. It's part practical gift, part rite of passage. You don't bring casseroles out here, you help build food security into the ground. The tools they use are almost all handmade. A curved ice pick made from narwhal tusk, flat shovels carved from driftwood. Some are newer repurposed metal with duct tape grips, but the technique stays the same, precise, methodical, slow. Historians still argue whether early Arctic cellars were initially dug as shelters or food stores. Some say they began as temporary hideaways, later adapted for storage as communities grew more sedentary. Others argue the reverse, that storage came first, and humans simply followed the food underground. There's even evidence suggesting dual-purpose designs: crawl-in shelters by day, fish caves by night. Whatever the origin, the modern cellars serve a singular, vital function. They hold food against time, not by sealing it off with plastic or drowning it in preservatives, but by slowing everything down. The act of digging isn't just physical, it's temporal. You're not just breaking ground. You're breaking into a slower pace of life. The workers don't speak much as they dig. Not because they're unfriendly, but because digging is a kind of meditation. The rhythm of shovel against snow, the soft thunk of frozen earth, the brushing of powder from gloved fingertips. It creates a sensory lullaby. You take a turn again, managing to clear a few scoops before your back reminds you it prefers podcasts and soft chairs. One of the elders pats your shoulder with an amused look. "Not bad," she says. For someone who thinks ice cream is a winter food, a gentle joke. You smile, sheepish. The cellar takes shape like a slow sculpture. First, a vertical shaft wide enough for one person. Then, the horizontal burrow is carved, widening, smoothing, shaping into a chamber where meat will rest, wrapped in fabric or moss. The design changes slightly depending on family preference. Some build shelves from ice blocks. Others use hollowed driftwood or repurposed plastic crates. Some don't use shelves at all, just stack things neatly like a careful game of edible Tetris. Ventilation is key. If air doesn't circulate, humidity can cause icing on the walls, or worse, mold. So small air holes are poked from the surface, monitored regularly. One family even attached a windsock to theirs, just to see which way the soup farts go. They claim, deadpan, sometimes humor is all that stands between you and the realization that you're digging a gourmet grave for raw fish. Speaking of which, one of the helpers brings over a bundle wrapped in sealskin. They lower it into a neighboring cellar. It's this year's Iguanak fermented walrus. Not your average charcuterie, but out here, it's considered a delicacy. The smell, when opened, is potent, enough to give your sinuses a new religion. But the taste rich, savory, slightly tangy, with a texture somewhere between soft cheese and tender meat. You ask how they know when it's ready. The elder tilts her head thoughtfully. It stops trying to walk away. She says, deadpan. Some fermented foods are checked by scent, others by touch. A slight give in the flesh, a lack of frost crust, a shift in weight. It's an intuitive science, part microbiology, part magic. One quirky tradition involves setting a small carved charm, a fish or seal figure, atop the lid of the cellar, not for decoration, but for memory. Each family has its own charm. It helps children remember whose cellar is whose. Some charms are worn smooth by decades of fingers. Others are brightly painted, a mix of ancient iconography and glitter glue. As the day ends, the digging slows. Snow is shoveled back over the finished chamber, leaving only the entrance visible. A lid will be placed tomorrow, but for now, the work is paused. You sit back on a snowbank, watching as steam rises gently from a nearby cooking pot. Someone's making a Q-Pix, warm cloudberry stew. It smells tart, like sunshine trapped in syrup. You're invited to taste it served in a carved wooden bowl, the heat warming your gloved hands. The girl from earlier sits beside you. She asks what kind of food you bury back home. You laugh softly, mostly feelings. You say she doesn't quite get it, but smiles anyway. The cold begins to creep in as the sun dips. Not harshly, just enough to remind you that the day is done, that you've touched something older than buildings, older than borders. You helped dig into the earth's memory, and it welcomed you for now. The morning is colder today, a sharper kind of cold, the kind that makes your eyelashes feel like they're slowly gluing themselves together. You step outside, and your breath curls up and over your shoulder like a lazy ghost. But you're not heading back to a cellar just yet. Today, you're about to meet the unsung heroes of the Arctic pantry, the tools. You follow a soft trail across packed snow. Footprints barely registering. A small outbuilding sits at the edge of the village. Snow drifted on one side like nature's version of siding. Inside, it's warmer barely, but the still air is filled with the soft, musty scent of old wood, leather, and salt. Laid out on low tables and hanging from the rafters are the tools used for digging, cleaning, storing, and checking ice cellars. None of them look new. Most are worn smooth, darkened by years of oil and frost. They have that unmistakable, I've seen things look that your modern kitchen gadgets would never understand. The first one you notice is a digging paddle made from driftwood, carved to fit perfectly in a gloved hand. The edges are slightly curved, allowing for a clean scoop in compacted snow. It's light, balanced, and silent when used, much quieter than any metal shovel, and less likely to send shock waves up your arm when you strike ice. Next to it, a bone-handled scoop with sealskin wrappings. It's used for removing soft snow, the kind that piles near the entrance and needs to be cleared often. The handle is carved with tiny notches, one for each winter it survived. A young man joins you in the shed, nods a quiet greeting, and picks up a curious-looking stick. It's curved at one end, with a small notch carved into it. Ice tester. He says simply, you tap the wall of the cellar. If it sings, it's solid. If it thuds, you got moisture. Time to dig deeper. He demonstrates by tapping a plank leaning nearby. Sure enough, the different spots make slightly different tones. You nod, impressed. He shrugs. My grandfather says it's just luck. But I think the wood listens. Historians still argue whether indigenous Arctic peoples developed these tools strictly for cellar maintenance, or if they were adapted from hunting implements. There's overlap. A scraping tool for cleaning a seal might also be used to smooth the inside of a snow chamber. Resourcefulness wasn't optional here. Every tool had to do double duty, triple, even. You spot a chisel made from walrus tusk. Its tip shaped like a wedge of frozen butter. It's used for shaving ice walls, making them smooth and slightly convex. Why convex? Because flat walls are more likely to drip as they warm. A slight curve helps water slide down instead of forming puddles. Yes, even in the Arctic, water is a problem. Just in a very slow, sneaky way. In one corner of the shed is a bundle wrapped in heavy fabric. The man unwraps it carefully, revealing a set of hooks and weights. For lifting bundles, he explains, you don't climb down every time. You lower this, hook the meat, pull it up slow. The weights are oddly beautiful stones, smoothed by the sea, attached to braided sinew cords. Each one fits neatly in the hand, cold but comforting. You test the grip. It's not flashy, but it works. And that's the theme here. Nothing is flashy. Everything is thoughtful. Tools are passed down, modified, repaired. Nothing is wasted. That twisted bit of antler, perfect for a latch. The cracked paddle, still good enough for stirring snow. One quirky item on a shelf catches your eye, a bundle of thin twigs tied with colored string. The young man grins. Spoilage detector. Stick it in the vent hole. If it bends too much, you've got off-gassing. In other words, something inside is fermenting a little too enthusiastically. You imagine the ancient Arctic version of a fridge post-bean soup. Not ideal. Outside the tool shed, you spot another elder sharpening a blade on a stone. It's a half-moon shape, a ulu used primarily for cutting meat and fish. This one has a story. The blade is iron, but the handle is old whalebone, cracked from years of use and care. She's not sharpening aggressively, just enough to whisper it back into readiness. You ask if the tools are ever replaced with modern versions. She nods. Some use snowblowers, chainsaws, but they're loud, and loud wakes things you don't want to wake. She's joking. Probably. But something in her voice makes you pause. In fact, silence is an important tool in and of itself. Too much noise might crack the wrong ice. Too much vibration could send snow cascading into a half-dug chamber. And besides, When you work quietly, you notice more. The way the wind shifts, the smell of the soil, the little creak that means a support beam is thinking about retiring early. That sensory attentiveness is passed down just like the tools. One family even has a set of carved bone tools with names etched into them, not the names of owners, but of feelings. One is labeled patience, another steady hands, a third, more cryptic, just says, let it wait. Some see these as metaphors. Others think they're gentle reminders that the work will never go faster than the land allows. You sit down with the elder, watching her hands move. She tells you stories of cellars that outlasted homes, of a tool buried in a collapse and found 10 years later, still sharp, of her uncle who swore he could tell the age of a fish by how the cellar smelled when opened. Maybe he just needed an excuse to open the cellar more often. One thing's for sure, these tools don't just build storage. They build memory. They teach the hands what the mouth cannot say. They train the muscles in the rhythm of slow, necessary survival. And they make a kind of music wood against snow, bone against frost, silence answering silence. You leave the shed with a new respect for the quiet elegance of problem solving. No batteries, no buzzers, just tools shaped by time, designed to last longer than trends, and possibly longer than you. As the sun dips again, and the air thickens with cold, you picture the hundreds of tiny, careful movements that go into maintaining an ice cellar. Not one of them glamorous. All of them essential. And the tools they wait, patient, in the shed, ready to be picked up again when the snow says it's time. The snow is crunchier underfoot today, a little louder, a little more deliberate. You follow the path that leads past the houses and dog sleds to the low hill where yesterday's cellar rests beneath a fresh dusting of snow. But you're not here for digging today. You're here to understand how people kept what's inside those cellars safe, not just from rot, not just from time, but from bears, from moisture, from curious children with too much energy and not enough spatial awareness. Because as peaceful as this Arctic village seems, an unattended food stash can still become a buffet for the wrong nose or a winter slide for the local 8-year-olds. The lid to a nearby cellar is open. A man is kneeling beside it, adjusting something you can't quite see. As you approach, he gestures you closer and lifts the lid higher. It's thicker than it looks, several inches of tightly packed wood, sealed at the edges with overlapping layers of moss and animal hide. Smell barrier, he says, pointing at the moss lining, keeps the scent in. You raise an eyebrow. For the bears, he grins. For the dogs, the bears don't need scent. They just know. Apparently, Arctic foxes, sled dogs, even the occasional wolf have been known to nose their way towards cellars, which is why every part of the structure is built with two goals: keep cold in and keep hungry noses out. Some lids are weighted with stones. Others use a locking bar, nothing high-tech, just a plank of wood fitted across the top with a satisfying thunk. One particularly quirky design involves a string of old tin cans nailed to the entrance. Bear alarm. Someone explains with a smirk. Doesn't stop them. But you'll hear the party starting inside the cellar. Food is stored in layers, fish on one side, meat on the other, sometimes separated by chunks of ice or bark-lined shelves. The elder who owns this one invites you down, handing you a headlamp on a strap made from softened sinew. The descent is narrow but steady. The cold hits you immediately, colder than outside. Somehow, denser. You shine your light along the interior bundles tied with hide, some wrapped in thick cloth, others placed in stone bowls half sunk into the floor. Each item is carefully spaced, no crowding. Air must move freely. At the far end of the cellar, a small opening leads into what looks like a secondary chamber. Overflow. The elder says simply, "For special things, you don't ask what qualifies as special out here, but you notice the careful way she steps, the way her hand rests lightly on each bundle as she passes. There's reverence here, even for a dried fish that looks like it's been waiting since the last ice age." Once back on the surface, she points out a set of curved sticks buried just beside the cellar. "Child gate," she says, amused. "Not foolproof, but it slows them down." Apparently, kids, especially toddlers just learning to walk, are endlessly fascinated by open holes in the ground. And since Arctic parenting favors gentle guidance over constant supervision, the environment has to help out. She walks you to a neighbor's cellar, where a large ring of stones surrounds the hatch. "This one had a bear last year," she says calmly. "Didn't get in, but he tried." You kneel to inspect the hatch. Deep claw marks score the edges of the wood, as though something with very large opinions tried to write a letter using only its nails. The lid held, thanks to a thick crossbeam and oddly an old reindeer harness tied across the top. Historians still argue whether early Arctic food protection measures were developed with large predators in mind, or if the designs were simply responses to climate and convenience. After all, if a bear really wants in, not much will stop it. But most protection measures seem geared more toward everyday threats: temperature shifts, snowmelt, and curious wildlife with a taste for fish oil. There's even a long-running village joke that the only thing more persistent than a bear is a bored dog. You hear stories of dogs outsmarting their way into cellars, chewing through ropes, nudging lids, even learning to dig at the corners until the snow gives way. One such dog, apparently named Tuck, now holds mythical status among the kids. He ate a whole season's cache of dried char and slept for 2 days. No regrets. To further deter unwanted guests, many cellars are built with slight downward angles and offset openings. It's harder to catch a whiff of the contents from a distance that way. A few even include small vents plugged with moss that only get removed when food is being retrieved. It's like opening a treasure chest, but only when you've earned it. And speaking of treasure chests, One family has turned their cellar lid into exactly that. Painted bright blue, it has a carved wooden handle shaped like a polar bear paw. Their reasoning: if you decorate it, the bear thinks it's a shrine. Bears are very respectful of shrines. You laugh. You hope they're joking. They do not confirm either way. Not all hazards are four-legged. Moisture, for example, is a stealthy thief. Too much humidity in a cellar can cause mold. Ice buildup, and even ruin the delicate texture of long-fermented meats. To counteract that, some families line their floors with crushed shells, porous stones, or dried moss materials that absorb moisture and help regulate temperature. One quirky but clever tradition you learn involves hanging a feather from the ceiling. If it droops or grows heavy, it means the air is too wet. Time to air the cellar or adjust the vent. As the day continues, you visit another family, prepping their cellar for winter. They're adding new insulation sheets of dried grass and seal hide, covered by woven mats. The mats are stitched with a decorative spiral pattern. Looks nice. You say, looks confusing. The father corrects you. For animals, breaks up the smell trail, a kind of olfactory camouflage. And then there's the ultimate line of defense respect out here. Food isn't just a resource, it's a relationship. You respect what you store, and you trust that the land will help you protect it. There's no need for motion sensors or padlocks, just layers of tradition, clever design, and the belief that everything has its place. As the wind picks up again, you watch an elder gently brush snow back over a lid. Not to hide it, just to remind the world this is ours. Carefully made, carefully maintained, and beneath that snow, sealed tight against smell, time, bears, and bouncing toddlers, lies dinner. Maybe next week's, maybe next spring's, maybe longer. The snow is swirling again, gentle as sifted flour. You watch flakes drift sideways across the landscape, each one settling into a groove it didn't plan on, like a sleepy snowflake commute. Today, you're going to meet the star of the show, the fish that doesn't rot. You're invited into a home this time. One of the low, wide houses built half into the ground. Snow drifted up around the sides like it's been tucked in for a nap. Inside, it's warm, really warm. Seal oil lamps glow softly on a ledge, and something savory is simmering in a pot. The smell is hard to place, but you already know it's fish. Very old fish. A woman gestures you toward a wooden crate near the door. It's not locked, not chilled, not labeled, but it might as well have a velvet rope around it. Inside are several tightly wrapped parcels. She pulls one out, unwraps it carefully, and reveals what looks like a long, slender piece of dried meat firm. Dark and slightly shiny. This one's 2 years old, she says, holding it up like an old library book. You nod respectfully. You do not ask for a bite. Not yet. The fish, probably Arctic char or whitefish, has been dried, fermented, and frozen in a precise sequence that turns it from potential spoilage hazard into delicacy. The process. You catch it, you gut it, you let it hang for a while in the cold wind, under a roof, or in a shaded spot. Then, once it's just flexible enough, you bury it. No salt, no chemicals, just time, cold, and a deep trust in the process. Historians still argue whether this technique was born from necessity or taste. Did people learn to ferment fish simply because the alternative was starvation in winter? Or did the flavor, rich, deep, tangy, become a delicacy that shaped entire cultural rituals around it? Either way, the result is the same food that waits patiently until you're ready to eat it. You're handed a knife, bone-handled, wide-bladed, and a small chunk of the fish. The first bite is complex. The texture is dense but yielding, almost like jerky that's gone to grad school. The flavor. Imagine smoked salmon took a year off to meditate. Funky, savory, salty, but oddly clean. There's a whisper of the sea in it, and also something very, very old. You try not to make a face, and the woman laughs softly. It's an acquired taste. We acquire it early. For many Arctic communities, fermented fish isn't just backup food, it's ceremonial. It's shared at important gatherings. It's gifted in bundles. It marks the changing seasons the way calendars never could. Some families ferment their fish in specific pits, using earth that's believed to impart a particular flavor, like a regional wine. The quirkiest part, some fish are buried with flavoring. Berries, chunks of seaweed, even certain types of moss. It's subtle, sure. But when you live in a land of snow and wind, subtlety is a luxury. You're led outside again, this time to a cellar that hasn't been opened in months. The lid sticks at first, then releases with a hiss of cold air. Inside, bundles of fish are wrapped in seal intestine waterproof, breathable, and mildly alarming. They're stacked carefully, labeled with carvings in the wood, not names, but symbols, a bear paw, a curling wave, a child's handprint. Each one marks a different season or year. Some bundles are family heirlooms, practically. You hear a story about a fish that was accidentally left in the ground for nearly 5 years. When it was finally recovered, the grandfather declared it perfect. The grandchildren declared it haunted. But that's the thing. This fish, this process, it defies what you think food is supposed to be. You're used to expiration dates, fridge drawers that breed chaos, vacuum-sealed packaging, and a constant background worry about whether the chicken's still okay. Here, the fish knows what it's doing. It wants to wait. It improves with time. Aged char is a thing, not in fancy food blogs, but in root cellars under snowdrifts, and the science backs it up, at least mostly. The freezing temperatures slow microbial growth. The fermentation process creates acids and alcohols that discourage spoilage. And drying ensures there's not enough moisture for bacteria to get comfortable. One researcher described the process as nature's pause button. Another simply said, "It works." So we study it. You move to a bench and sit beside a teenage boy who's carefully wrapping another bundle. He shows you how to fold the fish in dried leaves, not just for protection. He explains, "But because my aunt says the leaves tell its stories, he's serious. Or he's just really good at keeping a straight face." You don't ask which. You ask if the fish ever goes wrong. He nods. Sometimes. If the cellar's too warm. If the snow melts early. Or if you bury it before it's dried enough. He pauses. Or if you're just in a hurry, the fish doesn't like being rushed. That phrase sticks with you. The fish doesn't like being rushed. You think about how most of your food is rushed, grown fast, processed fast, eaten fast. Here, time is an ingredient. Patience isn't optional. It's seasoning. And then there's the social part. You watch as two families gather to open a shared cellar. They unwrap bundles slowly, pass around tiny bites, compare textures and flavors like wine tasters. One woman insists her 2021 char has a nuttier profile. Her cousin disagrees. He says it tastes like the ocean had a secret. No one argues too hard. They just chew, nod, and laugh. And you sit there, surrounded by cold, with your mouth still adjusting to a fish older than some YouTube trends. And you realize something: this isn't survival food. This is relational food. The kind that connects people across seasons, stories, and shared frost. You lean back, watching your breath drift upward in a slow ribbon. The cellar lid is closed again. The fish is sleeping, waiting, dreaming, and in the quiet, you swear you can hear it whisper, "Don't worry, I'm not going anywhere." You wake to the quiet again, though here, even quiet has texture. Outside, the snow has stopped, and a soft light glows against the frosted windows. Someone is singing a lullaby in a language you don't understand, but you catch the rhythm. It's about weather, or ancestors, or maybe fermented goose. It's hard to say, but it fits. Today's focus is perhaps the most counterintuitive thing you've learned so far: how to ferment in the frost. You step outside and follow a narrow path past a series of small wooden posts topped with carved animal figures. They look like trail markers, but they're not. They're fermentation sites. Each one marks a special spot where food is buried not just to freeze, but to change. Fermentation, after all, is life continuing even in the cold. It's not frozen preservation, it's transformation. And in the Arctic, where temperatures routinely mock the concept of room temperature, fermentation has been coaxed into happening in the slowest, quietest way possible. You arrive at a shallow pit dug into the side of a snowbank. A man is kneeling beside it, brushing back snow like a sleepy archaeologist. He waves you over and lifts a lid made from stretched hide over bent willow branches. Underneath, is a tightly sealed container, laced with strips of seal leather. He unties the laces slowly, revealing a wooden box inside a fermentation chamber. Inside that, wrapped in moss and layered with fish bones, is what looks like a pile of slightly translucent meat. Goose, he says with a nod. Bury it right, wait 6 weeks, and you'll never eat plain goose again. You believe him. The smell is complex, not unpleasant, just unfamiliar. Like the first time you walk into an old bookstore and realize the air smells like time and mystery. The process varies from community to community, but the basics are the same. Clean the meat. Wrap it in natural materials, sometimes moss, sometimes leaves, sometimes stomach linings. Bury it in a spot known for stable temperature. And wait. Let the microbes do their thing, even in the cold. Historians still argue whether these fermentation methods are thousands of years old or relatively recent innovations adapted to colder, post-glacial climates. Some archaeologists point to preserved animal remains and trace fat deposits to suggest humans were intentionally fermenting before written language. Others caution just because you buried a goose doesn't mean you knew why it tasted different later. But up here, people don't debate the theory. They just do it, and they know what works. One particularly unusual example, muktuk, fermented whale skin and blubber, usually eaten in thin, chewy slices that give your jaw a proper workout. It's not always buried, but when it is, the fermentation softens the texture and deepens the flavor. One elder tells you, fresh muktuk is chewy, but aged muktuk, that's a conversation. You're invited to help with a new batch. The family has caught a few bird snow geese, by the look of them, and is preparing them for burial. They're cleaned, not too thoroughly. Then stuffed with berries and fish eggs, for sweetness, the grandmother says. And balance. Balance is a big deal here. Too much moisture mold. Too little. It dries out. Bury too early in the season. It freezes solid. Too late, you get mush. You have to know the ground. Trust its mood. Which spots thaw faster? Which stay cool and consistent? You're handed a cleaned goose and a bundle of dried grass. You're going to try wrapping one. Your fingers fumble. The grass snaps in the wrong places. The stuffing leaks a little. A child watching nearby giggles. You look up, sheepish. How do you get it to stay? The grandmother answers without looking. Be gentle. It's not fighting you. Ah, that seems to apply to more than just food prep. Once wrapped, the geese are placed in a lined pit, a kind of food cocoon. They'll stay buried for a few weeks, then get checked, sniffed, prodded, and if ready, served in thin slices with seal oil and a side of very quiet pride. You ask if anything can't be fermented like this. The grandfather snorts. Chicken. Apparently, someone tried it once. No one will say what happened. Just not chicken. The fermentation process here isn't just culinary. It's philosophical. It requires trust, patience, and a willingness to let something change without control. That's not easy in the modern world, where we're trained to track every gram set timers, calibrate temperature. But out here, people learn to wait, to watch the snow, to smell the wind. There's even a joke among elders that the best fermenters are also the best at marriage. If you can let a goose take 6 weeks to become itself, you can wait for your husband to put his boots on. Later that afternoon, you're shown a different kind of fermentation setup, this one for fish eggs. The process is faster, more delicate, but no less mysterious. The eggs are washed, salted lightly with dried kelp, and placed in a porous sack buried just below the snow line. In a few days, they'll thicken, darken, take on a flavor that's somewhere between ocean breeze and aged butter. Not everyone loves it, but those who do really love it. One teenager describes it as spicy jelly. Another calls it a challenge snack. You try a spoonful, it wobbles slightly. The taste blooms slowly salty, rich, umami, to the point of feeling like it might start narrating your dreams. You chew thoughtfully. Someone claps you on the back. You lived, apparently. Not everyone does on their first taste. As evening returns, and the sky begins its slow swirl into pinks and grays, you sit beside a pile of snow with a stick planted in it, a fermentation marker, nothing fancy, just a carved seal at the top. You ask what's buried underneath. The child next to you grins, a surprise, and that's it, really. Each fermented bundle is a gamble, a gift, a quiet pact between the earth, the air, and the people willing to listen to both. You close your eyes and imagine all those buried parcels sleeping under the snow, changing quietly, becoming something new. The frost doesn't mind. The cold is patient, and somewhere under your feet, a goose is getting ready for its big debut. The village feels different tonight. Not quieter. It's always quiet, but warmer somehow. More alive. Lights flicker gently through snow-covered windows, and the smell of something rich and salty wafts across the air like a slow invitation. A feast is happening, and you've been invited. It's not a holiday, not a birthday, not even a solstice. It's just dinner. The kind that comes after the snow's been right. The cellars stayed cold, and the fish has finished doing whatever ancient dance it does under the ice. And tonight, that means it's time to eat. You follow the scent to a central gathering house, low roof, thick walls, big enough to hold half the village if everyone squeezes in politely and no one wears their fluffiest parka. A low fire burns at the center, not roaring just enough to push the cold to the corners. Lamps hang low from the ceiling. The air is full of steam, conversation, and the occasional joke that sounds like it might involve a seal and a stubborn shovel. You remove your boots, an unspoken rule, and step onto the soft matting laid across the floor. Furs, old rugs, layers of comfort built for weather that does not mess around. In the middle of the room sits a long, low table, or what counts as several wooden planks, balanced across crates and boxes, covered with seal skin and a scattering of hand-woven mats. Upon it, bundles, so many bundles, wrapped in hide, moss, cloth, some even tied with colorful ribbons that suggest someone's grandmother got creative this year. A woman gestures for you to sit, offering a bowl of warm broth. It smells of seaweed and fish. You sip. It's not hot, just warm enough to wake up your insides gently. No sudden heat. No spicy surprises. Just something that says, you made it through another cold day. Let's be kind to your stomach. As others gather, the unwrapping begins. One by one, the parcels are opened. Each is announced with the casual pride of someone showing off a baby photo. Last summer's char, seal ribs from the southern coast, my cousin's goose. Don't judge it by the smell. The aroma in the room shifts layered, pungent, not quite fishy, not quite smoky, more like memories that forgot how to spoil, a softness that clings to your throat, makes your nose twitch, your eyebrows question your life choices, and then, somehow, makes you hungry. A boy offers you a piece of fermented walrus. You hesitate. He shrugs. You don't have to like it. Just don't drop it. You don't drop it. You chew slowly. The texture is strange, slightly rubbery, like a very patient eraser, but the flavor is deep, earthy, like the cold itself had been turned into food. Historians still argue whether communal Arctic feasts were meant for celebration or survival. Was it about strengthening bonds, distributing stored wealth, or simply making sure no one ate alone? But in this room, the reasons don't matter. The sharing is the point. A man tells a story about a time when the snow collapsed the cellar and half the fermented meat had to be eaten immediately. We called it the Blizzard Buffet, he says, and several people groan in shared memory. You hear another tale about a fermented goose that came out of the ground with an unusually round shape. No one knows why. It tasted like berries and mistakes. Someone whispers, "There's laughter. Always laughter. Soft, unhurried. The kind that lingers like steam above a mug." Some dishes are simple, just sliced, served with seal oil. Others are wrapped in moss and warmed gently near the fire, bringing out a buttery texture that makes you forget the smell. A few are blended into thick pastes and served with dried seaweed or bits of dried root for crunch. And then there's acupics, those rare, tart cloudberries, mashed and stirred into chilled fish oil until it becomes something like pudding with an identity crisis. Sweet, sour, slick, and oddly comforting. You're handed a wooden spoon carved into the shape of a fish. It's clearly for special guests. You try not to drop it either. Children pass trays. Elders sip slowly, nodding approval. One woman comments that this year's muktuk tastes wiser. Another responds, "That's because we buried it during your nephew's drama." More laughter. The feast isn't fast. Nothing up here is. Bites are taken with long pauses. Not out of formality, but necessity. You have to chew. Some of these foods take time to break down. The body adjusts. The mind slows. The conversation turns quiet. One elder begins a story not about food, exactly, but about a dream he had as a boy, where the ice cellar talked to him, told him where to dig next, told him when the fish was ready. No one interrupts. Even the children listen. By the end of the story, you're not sure if it was real or metaphor, but you are sure it makes perfect sense. After the feast, the room thins. Some people leave quietly. Others stay to clean or nap near the warm stones. You help fold a few cloths, brush crumbs into your palm, and step outside into the crisp dark. Above, the sky is doing its slow motion magic, the northern lights curling faintly at the edges, just enough to remind you the universe has flair. Your breath fogs the air. Your belly is full of things your ancestors probably couldn't pronounce. And somewhere under the snow, 1,000 more meals are waiting, becoming, preparing themselves in silence. You walk slowly, footsteps muffled by fresh powder. The cold kisses your cheeks, but doesn't bite. You think about how so much of this life is built around waiting around, letting things become what they're meant to be. You reach your sleeping place. The fire inside flickers behind oiled skins. You take off your boots, step quietly inside, and sit by the lamp. You can still taste the fish, but more than that, you can still feel the warmth of being welcome at the table. Morning comes gently. There's no harsh alarm, no aggressive sunrise, just a slow bloom of light behind thin clouds, like someone dimming up a lamp in a room where people are still dozing. You step outside and notice something subtle, the smell of snow, clean, a little metallic, slightly earthy, with a faint trace of fish from the feast last night, still lingering in your scarf like a sleepy souvenir. Today, you're visiting a different kind of storage, not a private cellar dug into a backyard snowbank, but a shared one, a communal food stash tucked behind a drift near the edge of the village, where the wind sings longer songs. The elder who meets you there is tall and quiet, with a weathered parka and hands that move like they're already halfway through the work before he even begins. He doesn't explain much, but gestures for you to follow. You crest a small hill, and there it is, a larger hatch, wider than the others, built into a snow mound, reinforced with blocks of packed ice. It doesn't look particularly secure. No locks, no signs, no fencing. Just a sturdy wooden lid with a braided rope loop and a pair of snowshoes leaning casually against the side. This is the community cellar, shared by several families, managed in turns, respected by everyone. Inside, it's bigger, taller, too. A shallow staircase leads down, carved into the earth, slicked with frost and compacted snow. At the bottom, your breath fogs instantly. It's colder here than anywhere you've been yet. Not freezing, exactly, just profoundly cool. A settled kind of cold, like the ground is exhaling peace. Around the walls, Bundles rest in organized clusters, not labeled, not claimed with name tags or padlocks, just known. Each family has their own section, marked by small symbols etched into the dirt or scratched lightly onto the stone ledges, a feather, a fish, a triangle, a handprint. It's not ownership, it's rhythm. The elder points to a small pile of dried meat near the far corner. For the old ones, he says, and the ones who forget. You nod, understanding slowly. This cellar isn't just for storage. It's a safety net, a tradition, a quiet promise that no one goes hungry, not if the cold can help it. Historians still argue whether communal food sharing in the Arctic was driven more by scarcity or solidarity. Some insist it was practical less waste, more efficient storage. Others believe it was deeply cultural, an expression of interconnected survival in places where individualism was as dangerous as thin ice. The truth, of course, is probably both. You step carefully around a stack of tightly bundled fish wrapped in seal hide. Some are already marked with small notches tallies, perhaps, or dates. Others are simply stacked with the confidence of someone who's done this many winters in a row. Beside you, the elder opens a corner bundle and slices off a thin piece of dried meat with his ulu. He offers it without a word. You chew slowly, the flavor sharp and smoky. It's not meant to be fancy. It's meant to be enough. He watches you eat, then begins to tell a story. Not a big one, just a moment. Last year, he says, storm came early. Ice cracked near the river. My cousin lost his catch. He came here, took what he needed, left something the next month. It's said without judgment, without pride, just fact. A system that works, so long as you don't forget how to be human. Later, a small group of teenagers arrives with baskets. They descend into the cellar, greeting the elder with murmured hellos, and begin to sort items, some for family, some for trading, some for a neighbor whose knee gave out 2 weeks ago. It's quiet, purposeful work. No one takes too much. No one watches too closely. Trust, here, isn't declared. It's practiced. You ask how disputes are handled. The elder smiles. Slow and tired, we talk. Or we wait. Mostly we wait. Winter's long enough to smooth, sharp feelings. One girl packs up a few dried fish and tucks in a folded note. You catch a glimpse as it flutters, a simple drawing of a bird. You don't ask. You don't need to. Some messages are just between people and the cold keeps them safe. Before you leave, you help brush snow from the cellar's roof. A kind of maintenance ritual, done without instruction. Just enough to keep the weight even. Just enough to show the cellar that you remember. Outside, the wind has picked up slightly. The snow dances around your boots, swirling in lazy spirals. You watch the group walk back toward the village, baskets on their backs, laughter trailing like a soft thread. The elder stays a moment longer, looking out toward the hills. This, he says, is how we eat and remember. Then he nods, turns, and disappears into the white. You stand for a while, just breathing. The cold doesn't bite today. It presses gently, like a reminder. Under the snow, the food waits, not for one person, for all. A shared harvest, a quiet kindness buried in frost, and it feels right, somehow, that so much of this world is built on trust you can't see, on food no one claims, on stories too soft for ink. It happens sometime between a quiet morning and an even quieter lunch, a soft, distant crack, like a frozen branch surrendering in the woods. No one panics, no one runs, but everyone in the village notices. Heads turn, eyes meet. The kind of sound that means something underground just shifted. You're with a young woman at the time, helping her pack snow around the base of her family's newer cellar. She stops mid-scoop and tilts her head. You hear it again, thump, low and deep, like a door closing underwater. That's not good, she mutters, within minutes. Half a dozen people are heading toward the slope where an older community cellar was last seen. Shovels over shoulders, ropes coiled, expressions calm but focused. You trail behind, heart starting to thud, despite the soft crunch of snow underfoot. Turns out, this is a known problem. Sometimes, the ice fights back. When a cellar collapses, it usually doesn't make a scene. No explosions, no movie-style sinkholes, just a slow, inward buckle, like a tired sigh from the earth. Permafrost, despite the name, isn't permanent. It shifts, breathes, melts around the edges. And when it does, the delicate balance of carefully stored food, dry air, and cold control gets messed up. You arrive to find the damage already being assessed. The lid has slumped to one side like a crooked hat around the edges. Snow has sunken in, forming a warped circle of loose powder. One man pokes the entrance with a long stick. It disappears far too quickly. Water. Someone says, melted through. You wince instinctively. That means the cellar flooded. And that means dinner might now be a slushie. The young woman sighs, takes off her mittens, and crouches at the edge, brushing snow aside to look more closely. This was my cousin's cache, she says, mostly seal, some berries, last year's goose. She doesn't sound angry, just tired. Another person arrives with a small drone camera. Yes, they have one. Technology's not banned here. It's just used differently. The drone is dropped gently down the entrance. Everyone huddles around the screen as blurry images come into focus. Fish floating sideways in cloudy ice water. Wrappings unraveled. A wooden crate tipped over. Its contents, a pile of mush. Yep. Someone mutters, "That goose is soup now." It's said gently. A small laugh follows. Not cruel, just practical. Historians still argue whether traditional cellars were more stable in earlier centuries or if today's environmental shifts are simply revealing flaws that were always there. Some point to permafrost, data warming trends, rising water tables, unpredictable melt zones. Others claim it's a construction issue, a forgotten technique, a shortcut taken once too often. Whatever the cause, the result is the same food. Once safe and waiting, now soggy and spoiled. The recovery begins without ceremony. Ropes are anchored. A few brave volunteers descend into the muck. You're offered a harness. You decline, politely but firmly. You're helpful, but not that helpful. Instead, you help sort what comes out. Some items are salvageable things, double wrapped, still solid at the core. Others go straight to a separate pile, destined for burial, or maybe use as sled dog treats. They don't mind a little texture. Someone jokes. There's no yelling, no accusations, just work. Quiet teamwork. You get the sense this isn't anyone's first flooded cellar. The woman beside you starts rewrapping a half-wet bundle of char. This one's still okay, she says. If we dry it tonight. She glances at you. Want to help? You nod. And soon, you're back in a home you hadn't planned on visiting today. Carefully unrolling fish near a stone stove. The warmth is gentle, enough to coax out moisture, but not cook the meat. Racks are set up near the walls, and thin strings of sinew are stretched like sleepy clotheslines. The room smells like smoke, salt, and resilience. She shows you how to rotate the fish slowly, checking for frost crystals or signs of softness. It's not ruined, she says, more to herself than to you. Just surprised. Outside, others are rebuilding. The hole is being redug. The walls reinforced with fresh snow and blocks of ice. It'll take a few days, maybe longer, but they're not waiting for spring. The work starts now, before the ground has a chance to forget what it's holding. Later, around a fire, someone tells the story of the great collapse of '89, when 3 cellars went down in a single night, and half the village had to live off sour berries and fox jerky for a month. We got creative. An elder says, invented 6 new ways to dislike fox jerky. You're handed a small strip to taste. It's chewy, gamey, not as bad as expected, but you understand the sentiment. You ask if they ever lose everything. Not yet, someone says. But it could happen. That's why we keep teaching. Teaching how to dig smarter, how to reinforce walls, how to pick the right spot for burial, not just the convenient one. They're even experimenting with new materials now. Layers of insulation made from repurposed fabric, moisture detectors made from modified baby monitors. It's not about staying old-fashioned. It's about staying fed. And staying fed means staying flexible, even if that means drying fish next to your bookshelf or rebuilding your cellar under the outhouse. Because bears don't usually look there. You're not sure if that last part is a joke. You decide not to ask. As the day ends and the last of the salvageable food is dried, You sit beside the young woman, watching the fish gently sway on their lines. You get used to it. She says, the fixing, the losing, the rebuilding. Then she smiles faintly, like relationships, but colder. You both laugh. The kind of laugh that releases tension like steam. Outside, the new snow covers the old collapse. You can't tell anything happened unless you already know. And maybe that's the lesson the land always shifts. Sometimes gently, sometimes not. But the people shift with it, and the food. The food either floats or finds a way to dry again. There's a running joke in the village that everyone's first year with a cellar comes with one unforgettable lesson: something will go wrong. Today, you're learning about the foods that should never be buried, no matter how curious, desperate, or misinformed you might be. You start your day with an elder named Insomniac, who sits in the morning sun polishing an ulu blade with deliberate care. Around her, various objects are laid out: dried herbs, strips of fish skin, what looks like a small tangle of kelp, and an empty soup can. Guess which one of these made someone sick? She asks, eyes twinkling. You guess the can. She snorts. Close. But it was the kelp. Too fresh. Buried too wet. Turns out, not all traditional foods are meant to ferment underground. Some don't age well. Others grow things they're not supposed to. And a few just offend the snow spirits. As one elder half jokes, as you sit beside Insomniac, she shares a running list of don't bury this wisdom. First up, chicken. Universally declared the worst candidate for Arctic fermentation. Not traditional, not native. And when buried, it tends to go rogue fast. Smells like old apologies. She says, tastes like regret. You laugh, then realize she's not joking. Next, eggs. Someone tried once, apparently, buried in moss-lined pits, hoping for a slow-cooked delicacy. What they got instead was an explosion gas buildup plus spring thaw equals a smell that evacuated 3 homes. They called it the day of the sulfur moon. Insomniac deadpans. Then there's fatty meats with no lean, like pure blubber without any connective tissue. Ferments too fast. Collapses in on itself like a soggy tent. You can tell when it's gone wrong if it starts to hum. She adds, barely hiding a grin. Historians still argue whether these forbidden foods were always off limits, or whether ancient families learned the hard way over generations. Some suggest that food failures were just part of the process, natural culinary boundaries discovered, one failed fish at a time. Others propose there were once more flexible guidelines that became codified into rules over time. You suspect the truth is a little of both. Food, after all, is trial and error with a deadline. Later in the day, you're invited to a small gathering where a few teenagers are performing a tongue-in-cheek fermentation fails skit, part comedy, part education. One girl pretends to bury a pizza pocket. Another yells, "We do not ferment corn dogs in this house. and the audience erupts in sleepy laughter. They even have a song, an off-key but enthusiastic tune about the tragic fate of a buried pancake. The chorus goes, fluffy on Friday, fuzzy by Tuesday, funky by Sunday, never again. It's a hit. After the performance, one of the adults pulls you aside to show a sealed clay pot near his home. This, he says, is goose gone wrong. He opens it briefly and lets you take a quick whiff. You instantly regret your choices. It's sour. It's sharp. It smells like if yogurt had a grudge. Too warm when I buried it. He explains, ground didn't freeze fast enough. He's keeping it as a lesson. Not to eat, just to remember. Every good fermenter has a failure jar. He tells you, you keep it to stay humble. You start noticing them around little failure jars, tucked near drying racks, or labeled with a date and a frown. One is wrapped in bright pink ribbon. Clearly, someone's idea of a joke gift. Another has a carved label that reads the great mistake of Euro 7. And it's not just about ingredients. Technique matters too. One person tells you about a time they packed fish too tightly in the cellar. No airflow. They explain. The top dried out. The bottom melted. When we opened it, it looked like fish lasagna. You raise your eyebrows. It tasted worse than it looked. Some foods are too delicate. Berries, for example, are rarely fermented underground unless dried or preserved first. Raw berries tend to attract unwanted microbial guests. As one elder says, if the flies like it, don't give it to the ground. There's also a superstition half joked about, half believed that burying onions confuses the earth. No one can explain why, but no one's tried it twice. And yes, someone once tried chocolate. It was a gift. A woman explains, from someone visiting. Thought he'd make it Arctic. So he buried a chocolate bar in the snow. You ask what happened. She sighs. The dog found it, ate it, got sick, dug up a whole cache looking for more. The dog survived. The chocolate, not so much. And that seems to be the real theme here, respecting the ground's boundaries. You don't just throw things into the snow and hope for the best. You listen. You observe. You understand what the cold welcomes and what it quietly rejects. In the evening, Insomniacs sits with you again by the fire, showing you a tiny carved totem made from fish bone. It's got wide eyes and a slightly panicked expression. This, she says, is the spirit of spoiled things. You laugh. What do you do with it? She shrugs. Put it by the door. When someone tries to bury something stupid, the totem now lives near the house of the man who buried sour cream. You sip warm tea, the fire crackling beside you, and think about all the quiet wisdom it takes to know what not to do. How restraint, learned through smelly trial and error, is a form of art in itself. The cold, you realize, teaches more than preservation. It teaches discernment, and sometimes that lesson smells just bad enough to remember forever. It's evening again. The kind where the horizon glows in peach and lavender. and the wind has finally tucked itself into bed. You're invited into one of the older homes in the village, not for a lesson, not for a meal, but just to be. The door creaks open, and inside, the warm amber glow of seal oil lanterns fills the air. The walls are hung with furs and weathered tools, the floor covered in layers of old blankets, reeds, and soft moss mats. The room is calm, a little smoky, and entirely still, the kind of stillness that wraps around your thoughts and gently hushes them. You're not here to study fish or dig cellars. Tonight is for quiet evenings, storytelling, seal oil light, sleepy questions, a lullaby wrapped in fur and fermented patience. You settle near the hearth. There's no crackling fire, just a single lantern. Its glass smudged from years of use, casting gentle shadows across the room. The fuel is seal oil, tapped from blubber rendered months ago. It burns steady, without flicker, and gives off a smell that's both sharp and comforting, like old leather mixed with toasted seaweed. An elder sits beside you, wrapped in a blanket the color of early snow. Her voice is low, a little scratchy, and just raspy enough to lull your spine into a slower rhythm. She points to the lamp, to the shore. We used to read shadows in the oil, she murmurs, the way the flame bent when the stories got exciting. You smile, but say nothing. The room doesn't need your voice just now. As others settle, and children curled under blankets, one elder slowly combing her hair with a carved bone pick. The stories begin. Not grand sagas, not mythologies, just memories passed around like warm bread. Did I ever tell you? One voice begins. How we found a frozen bird inside the cellar wall. There's a chuckle. We never did figure out how it got there. Another elder chimes in. My uncle used to keep raisins in a jar near the entrance, said it sweetened the cold. Someone else hums softly in agreement. The room drifts gently between conversation and quiet. No one commands attention. Stories happen when they happen. There's no beginning, no end. Just people remembering together. Historians still argue whether storytelling traditions like these were purely social or served practical survival purposes, oral maps, seasonal warnings, moral codes in disguise. But in this room, there's no argument. These stories are simply what you do when the food is buried, the tools are cleaned, and the only thing left to tend is each other. A child asks if fish dream. The elder beside you doesn't hesitate. Yes. Of swimming slower. You nod. That sounds right. Another child wants to know if the ice hears you. It listens. Someone says, but it only answers when it cracks. They laugh. But it's not a joke. The seal oil lamp flutters slightly. Someone refills it with practiced hands dipping a spoon into a hide-wrapped pouch, topping it off like feeding a baby. It sputters, steadies, resumes its slow, golden rhythm. You lean back, head against a padded wall. The fur beneath your cheek is warm from body heat. You feel your muscles loosen without asking. It's not sleep yet, but it's the thinking about sleep stage. And this room, it was made for that. More memories drift by. A story about an old man who left fermented goose for a ghost. A tale of someone who tried to build a cellar in a place the dogs refused to sniff. A rumor that snow can remember laughter if you fall in it face first. You've stopped trying to sort fact from fiction. It doesn't matter. These stories aren't meant to be examined. They're meant to be felt. Someone plays a tiny drum for a while. Just soft thumps, like a heartbeat from under a pillow. The lantern light bends. The shadows shift gently across the ceiling, forming shapes that your brain half recognizes an owl, maybe, or a sled pulled by a fish. Nothing sharp, nothing demanding, just suggestions of dreams. You ask if there are stories about the very first ice cellar. Several people respond at once. It was found, not made. It appeared after a big storm. It was dug by a girl who was hiding her favorite fish. There was no first. There was just snow and hunger. All of these answers are accepted. The conversation slips away again. The room settles into the kind of silence that can only happen when everyone feels full. Not just full of food, but full of time, of companionship, of being gently held in a shared moment. A log shifts outside with a faint crack, and everyone hears it. No one moves. One of the children mumbles, "That's the cellar checking in." The adults nod. A good explanation. The cellar isn't just a hole. It's part of the house, part of the rhythm. It snores sometimes. It sighs. It remembers things. You wonder if it remembers you. The lamp's glow softens even further now, its flame curling like a comma ready to end the sentence. Someone yawns. Someone else pulls a blanket up to their nose. The elder beside you hums quietly. You don't recognize the tune, but it fits. You close your eyes, the warmth of seal oil, the echo of stories, the feeling of being very small and very safe in a world that, just for tonight, doesn't ask anything from you. Let the fish dream. Let the snow whisper. Let the cellar rest beneath its blanket of ice. You wake slowly, not because something stirred you, but because the cold has decided to gently press its fingertips against your cheeks and remind you that yes, you're still in the Arctic. The fire's low, the room dim, and the seal oil lamp now little more than a glowing ember in a belly-shaped bowl. Today, you're going to explore something most people overlook: the humble art of insulation fur, fungus, moss, and all the materials used not just to stay warm, but to keep the food in those cellars perfectly cold. Your host, a soft-spoken woman named Kiana, bundles herself in layers that somehow seem both too few and too effective. "You'll sweat if you overdress," she says, then hands you a pair of sealskin mitts that look like they've hugged 100 winters. You step outside, and the cold is crisp, not punishing, just alert. It's the kind of cold that feels like a deep breath for your skin. The snow squeaks under your boots. Kiana leads you toward a small, dome-shaped shelter near the back of her home. Not a food cellar, at least not entirely. This one is a workroom of sorts, where insulation materials are gathered, dried, and prepared for use. She lifts the flap of the entry and beckons you in. Inside shelves, low, wide, packed with bundles, rolls of fur, twists of moss, even stacks of birch bark thin as paper. The scent is earthy, faintly sweet, like a forest library. She picks up a bundle and unwraps it. Inside is sphagnum moss, dried and cleaned. This, she says, keeps moisture where it belongs. You line it around the edge of a cellar to stop frost from creeping in. She presses it into your gloved hand. It's light as air, but when you squeeze it, it springs back. She shows you how it's layered: first the moss, then fabric, then a fur lining, depending on what's being stored. High-fat meats get extra layering, especially near the top of the cellar where heat might sneak in during warm spells. Next, she shows you mycelium sheets. Yes, fungus, grown on purpose, baked in the sun, shaped into squares. Not exactly traditional, but surprisingly effective. Her nephew had read about it in a magazine and gave it a try. Turns out the mushrooms want to help, she says, amused. Historians still argue whether indigenous Arctic communities relied more on natural insulation or architectural placement, digging into shaded hills, using prevailing winds, snowdrift patterns. Likely both. The land offers materials, and experience teaches how to arrange them. And then there's fur. Oh, the fur, caribou, fox. Even the sheared remnants of old parkas repurposed into strips and mats that get tucked around the base of the cellar or laid across lids. You see one mat covered in stitched embroidery. Not necessary, but beautiful. Someone cared enough to make even insulation feel like a gift. You ask if any modern materials are used. Oh, sure, Kiana says, rummaging behind a crate. This one's a retired sleeping bag. And here's a yoga mat. Foam's good, if you don't mind the color. She grins, holding up a bright purple mat with faded dolphins. They laugh, she adds, but that cellar's been colder than anyone else's all season. You walk with her to check on a smaller storage pit nearby. She pulls back the lid and lifts a flap of thick hide lined with fur on one side and moss on the other. This is the deluxe model. She says, air can't get in. Moisture can't settle. Cold stays where it belongs. You lean down and feel it a slow, creeping cool. Not icy, just perfectly still. Insulation here isn't about trapping heat. It's about preserving cold, maintaining stasis, letting food rest at the right temperature, not freezing, not thawing, just existing in a quiet chemical pause. You help her rewrap the bundle and add an extra layer of dried seaweed matting on top. It smells faintly like brine and wind. Seaweed's good, she says. Not traditional up here, but strong. And bears don't like the texture. You pause. Wait, Bears care about texture, she shrugs. They're picky eaters, mostly. In the afternoon, you meet a group of kids building their first practice cellar behind a sled shed. They've stacked blocks of snow around the edge and are carefully layering found materials, fur scraps, shredded newspaper, even bits of cloth from an old jacket. It's not real. One says, just testing, but they take it seriously. They argue gently about how much moss to use, which side should face the wind, whether it needs a second vent hole. One kid pulls out a strip of plastic wrap. My mom said this stuff makes it warmer. They try it, then peel it off. Too sweaty. Someone announces, even here, the materials speak. You can't force the land to follow your rules. You have to listen. Later, Kiana shows you one of the older cellars still in use. The lid is a thick sandwich driftwood planks, moss, seal hide, then a repurposed plastic tarp held down with frozen ropes. You help her lift it. The air inside feels like a refrigerator running on ancient wisdom. The temperature hasn't fluctuated in months. She points to the ceiling, where a strip of fur is pinned in place like a curtain. For condensation, she explains. It catches the drips before they hit the meat. Even gravity gets managed here. That evening, you sit by the fire again. The dried moss used earlier for insulation now burns gently, releasing a scent that smells like the cold and reverse earth warmed up just enough to remember what it once held. You sip hot broth, and your mind drifts to the layers of care buried beneath the snow. Fur, moss, fungus, fabric, each one placed not just for function, but with affection. Because when your food lives underground, you don't just protect it, you tuck it in. You're in the back of a snow-crusted workshop when you hear the phrase, "We brought the scientists in last spring." They left impressed and confused. It's said with a grin over a mug of smoky tea by a man named Ilya, who's holding a frostbitten digital thermometer in one hand and a seal fat smeared logbook in the other. Today, you're stepping into the cautious dance between modern science and ancient wisdom, the way researchers have tried, and sometimes failed, to explain just how indigenous Arctic food cellars work so well. You sit with Ilya at a small bench made of ice blocks covered in scrap wood. Beside him is a chart, hand-drawn lines showing seasonal temperatures at different cellar depths. He points to one line that stays eerily straight, 6 feet down, even when the air's above freezing. Consistent, like the earth's sighing real slow. You nod. He pulls out a plastic bag with sensors, tiny temperature trackers that he and a few visiting researchers buried at various cellar sites last year. They were trying to track moisture levels, microbial activity, even the rate of fermentation. They thought everything would slow to a stop, he says, but it didn't. It just changed pace. The scientists, many from universities far south of here, had come armed with fancy tools, infrared thermometers, soil probes, humidity monitors. But after a few days of observation, most of them simply ended up watching, taking notes as elders checked fish by smell. by the sound of a tap against frozen hide, by the weight of a bundle cradled in their arms. Historians and anthropologists have long debated whether indigenous Arctic communities possessed an intuitive understanding of microbiology before the science even had a name. Some claim that centuries of trial and error mimic what we now define in lab terms. Others argue that fermentation techniques evolved in spite of scientific logic, relying instead on environmental luck. But science is beginning to catch up. Ilya shows you a set of graphs printed from one team's visit. They recorded fermentation curves, the breakdown of proteins in buried char over a 6-week period. They expected decay. He says they found controlled transformation like a slow cooker. If your slow cooker was made of ice and tradition. In one experiment, researchers measured the bacterial communities in fermented walrus over 90 days. The results were surprising. Rather than chaotic spoilage, they found stable, low-temperature-loving microbes doing the exact job they were supposed to, producing acids, inhibiting pathogens, and turning tough meat into nutrient-dense, edible food. You know what they called it? Ilya asks. You shrug. Low-temperature anaerobic fermentation under stable cryogenic conditions. He grins. We just call it letting the goose nap. That might be the most poetic summary of science meeting culture you've ever heard, but the collaboration hasn't been without its hiccups. One visiting researcher insisted on vacuum sealing fish samples. The elders refused. That's like asking the fish to hold its breath forever. Someone had said, it needs to breathe while it thinks. You're shown another project. A student had tried to recreate a traditional cellar using modern insulation and prefabricated plastic walls. It stayed cold, technically, but the food spoiled anyway. No airflow. Ilya explains. No respect. Airflow is a big deal. Modern refrigeration traps cold, but it also traps humidity. Traditional cellars breathe. They pull air through natural vents and curved walls. They shift gently with the seasons. They allow the food to feel alive, even while it rests. You head out with Ilya to one of the monitored sites. He lifts a lid and points to a cluster of data loggers, tiny blinking lights, nestled near bundles of fish and meat. He checks the readings on a tablet. Perfect, he mutters. 3 degrees, no spikes. You ask how much the science has helped. Some, he says, it confirms what we know. But it's also nice to have numbers that say we're not crazy. You sit beside the cellar, watching your breath curl. He tells you about a recent study that tested nutrient retention in traditionally fermented foods versus modern freezing methods. The results. The cellar foods retained more omega-3s, less spoilage, higher overall caloric value. Turns out, he says, if you listen to the ground, it gives back more than you'd think. The village now collaborates regularly with a few universities. Students visit. Some stay for weeks. They dig, they measure. They try and often fail to predict when fermentation will be done. Meanwhile, the elders shake their heads. and poke the bundles with fingers worn smooth by winter. One student reportedly asked, "How you know when the fish is ready? You dream about it." The elder replied, "The student wrote it down." Seriously, and maybe that's the key. Not dismissing one way of knowing for another. Not replacing instinct with sensors or ritual with numbers, but finding the overlap. The places where science stands back and whispers, "Oh, even now." Elia's running an experiment comparing 3 cellars across the region. One dug in sand, one in rock, and one in snow-packed soil. He's tracking not just temperature, but taste. Families will blind test the fish later. The winner gets bragging rights and a hand-carved golden ladle trophy that's mostly a joke. Mostly, as the sun begins its sideways descent again, you help Elia cover the cellar with fresh snow. He pats the lid like an old friend. Science wants to predict everything, he says, but sometimes the cold does what it wants. You nod, brushing frost from your gloves. Above you, a crow glides past, silent as shadow, somewhere beneath your boots. A data logger blinks quietly in the dark, and all around you, the science keeps humming low, respectful, slightly amazed. You're standing beside the main fire pit when a sharp gust of wind picks up and carries a question across the camp. Someone, half bundled in fur and curiosity, asks, "Wait, but is it really safe to eat something that's been underground for a year?" Everyone nearby chuckles. Here it comes. Again, the great debate. Is this ancient practice of burying, fermenting, and aging food in permafrost really safe? Really nutritious? Or is it just something people have adapted to because, well, what else are you going to do with 1,000 pounds of seal? You follow a group into the communal house where tonight's topic is on full display. Literally. A low wooden table is spread with slices of dried, fermented, frozen, aged, and somewhat squishy delicacies from various cellars. Each one comes with a story and a mild disclaimer. Someone hands you a thin sliver of translucent fish that glistens like old parchment. This one's 3 winters old. They say with pride, "It's chewy, like truth." You nod, chew, and prepare your stomach for a philosophical journey. The discussion starts simply enough. A few people swear by fermented foods for their health benefits. Good for digestion. One elder says, patting their belly keeps everything moving, especially when you don't. Another chimes in, "My grandmother made us eat a slice of fermented goose before big trips. Said it gave us slow energy." You're not sure what slow energy is, but it sounds kind of appealing, like a nap in food form. Still, not everyone agrees. One younger villager says they prefer dried meats over buried ones. Cleaner flavor. They insist. Less funky. More polite. The elders raise eyebrows, but say nothing. The kind of nothing that means you'll understand when you're older or when you're hungrier. Historians still argue whether the nutritional benefits of these foods were fully understood by early Arctic communities or simply observed over time. Some evidence suggests that fermented meats retain more bioavailable nutrients, especially in fish, where vitamin D and omega-3s remain relatively stable even after long-term burial. Others point out that the microbial action itself may make certain proteins easier to digest. But there's a fringe argument too, that the benefits aren't just in nutrients, but in the ritual of eating them. There's something powerful. The theory goes about consuming food that took months, sometimes years to prepare. That required patience, planning, restraint, the kind of food that teaches you about time as much as it feeds your body. You're shown a small book, handwritten notes from a university study done in collaboration with the community. Page after page of lab results, bacterial colony counts, microbial graphs, pH level breakdowns. The conclusion, mostly safe, sometimes funky, always interesting. Of course, there are risks. One family recalls a spoiled goose that gave half the village a case of the midwinter belly grumbles. Nothing serious, just enough to make everyone very familiar with their snow latrine roots. That was the year the snow seemed judgmental, one man says, and the room bursts into laughter. Safety protocols exist here, though they're more tradition than law. You always sniff before slicing. You check for excess gas pressure. Some fermented foods bloat when unhappy. If a bundle hisses, you pause. If it moans, you throw it to the dogs. There's also a saying, if the fish sings, don't eat it. Again, you hope that's a joke. You ask about taste changes over time. Does year-old fermented char taste different from one that's only been underground a month? Of course. Someone says, that's like asking if a teenager is different from a toddler. They offer you samples. One's buttery. Another is sharp, almost citrusy. A third has the rich, mellow funk of an aged cheese that's seen things. You chew slowly, letting the flavors unfold like sleepy secrets. One person brings up mercury content, a concern in certain Arctic fish, but the elder across the table waves a hand. We know. We listen. We change when we need to. And many communities have adjusted their catch choices, moved fermentation sites further inland, and tested fish when possible. Adaptation isn't a new idea here. It's how people have always lived. You can't stop eating. Someone says, just because the food has opinions, you're handed a sliver of muktuk, fermented whale skin with a rim of blubber. It's been aged 6 months. The texture is like dense memory. The flavor hits all at once. Salt, fat, a whisper of something ancient, and you realize maybe safety isn't always about sterility. Maybe it's about knowledge, routine, and trust. Trust in the land, trust in the hands that buried the food, trust in your body's ability to remember how to eat something that doesn't come with an expiration date printed on plastic. As the night wanes down, a final round of snacks is passed around. Someone hands you a piece of dried goose neck, fermented just enough to be chewy. This one won't kill you, they say, but it might haunt your taste buds. You eat it anyway. And honestly, it's not bad. The fire crackles softly. The air smells like oil and ash. And somewhere outside, under a mound of snow, a future meal is aging quietly slow, funky, nutritious, and, depending on who you ask, possibly whispering. You feel it first in your boots, a faint squelch, a dampness that wasn't there the day before. The snow is still everywhere, still white and wind-raked, but something underneath has changed. The ground doesn't crunch the same way. It sighs, melting. Kiana meets you near the trail that leads to the outer cellars. She's holding a stick, not for walking, but for testing. Every few steps, she jabs it into the snow, listening for a particular sound. If it sinks fast, she says, it's too soft to trust. You follow her to her family's cellar, one you helped insulate earlier in the season. It's still holding. For now, the lid is firm, the snow packed, but just beyond it, a ring of meltwater glistens under the mid-morning light. Another week like this, she mutters, and the vents will flood. This is the other reality of Arctic food storage. The threat not of predators or mold or failure, but of a warming earth slowly unweaving what centuries have held together. You hear stories all day. A cellar collapsed 2 winters ago when the permafrost thawed 4 feet deep, an entire winter's cache lost. Another was infiltrated by slush, turning fermented fish into sludge. One family moved their cellar 3 times in 5 years, each time trying to stay ahead of the melt line creeping north. Historians and climate scientists still argue whether we've passed the point of no return, or whether local mitigation efforts can buy more time. But here, no one argues. They adapt. They react. They prepare for the worst while coaxing the best from a land that doesn't owe them anything. You visit a few more homes. Everyone's watching the ground now. Test sticks lean against doorways. Children are told to stay off certain trails. Someone marks a patch of softening ice with a flag made from an old scarf. And in the middle of it all, the cellars, quiet, dignified, endangered. You meet Ilya again, this time inspecting an older communal site. He's laying small temperature sensors in the upper soil, checking for signs of premature thaw. Used to be we worried about bears. He says, now we worry about April. He shows you a set of photographs, before and after shots taken 10 years apart. The snow looks the same, but in one photo, the cellar lid sits higher. In the other, it's sunken. The permafrost beneath it didn't just shift, it vanished. You help him dig a test trench. It's shallow, maybe 2 feet, but instead of the hard, dry frost you're used to, the ground is damp, clay soft, insulting. You can't bury in mud, he says, wiping his gloves. The village has begun trying other options. Temporary, cold storage sheds powered by solar. Elevated containers insulated with fur and foam. Even converted boats. lined with moss and buried part way in the snow to mimic traditional chambers. But it's not the same. You can keep the food cold. One woman says, but it doesn't taste right. It doesn't feel right. You ask if she means texture. She shakes her head. I mean story, because the food isn't just stored in the ground. It's shaped by the ground. The soil, the frost, the stillness. Take away the earth, and something gets lost, even if the nutrition remains. In the afternoon, a group gathers to reinforce a cellar threatened by runoff. Snow blocks are cut from deeper drifts and packed tightly around the lid. Drainage channels are carved with handmade shovels. Moss is reapplied. It's part engineering, part prayer. You lend a hand. The work is slower now, wetter. A shovel strike sprays slush instead of chips of ice. Gloves get heavy. Boots get soaked. But no one stops, because it's not just about saving dinner. It's about not letting go of the way things are supposed to feel. About preserving a process that isn't just practical, it's cultural memory. Buried in frost. Later, during a tea break, someone reads aloud from a printed climate report, full of charts and words like irreversible degradation. No one panics, but the room is quiet in a different way. Not sleepy, just listening. Then an elder speaks up. Snow is stubborn, she says. So are we. People nod. A few smile, but no one denies the weight in the room. The evening is colder. Suddenly, temperatures dipping again, as if the land wants to reassure you it can still hold the line. But the snow tells a different story. Softer, less certain. You step outside and look out across the village. A few cellars still sit strong, their lids frosted, their vents clear. Others are surrounded by slush barriers, flags, temporary signs, and somewhere under your feet, the ice is deciding whether it will stay another season. You realize then food here has always been a collaboration between people and ground, between cold and patience. But when the ground changes its mind, when the cold leaves early, when tradition finds itself ankle deep in meltwater, what happens then? The people are adapting. They'll find new ways, but they're grieving too, not loudly, not dramatically, just in the quiet way of those who've lived long enough to know how to say goodbye to something sacred, even as they keep digging. The next morning, you wake to the sound of a snow shovel scraping across stone, not hurried, not desperate, just steady, rhythmic, a reminder that even as the ground changes, people don't stop. Today, you're going to see what that looks like, the new generation reclaiming old methods, making tweaks, mixing modern with ancient. You find Kiana's nephew, a teenager named Tomek, standing beside what looks like a science fair project that grew legs and decided to move in. It's a small above-ground storage unit, elevated on stilts made from driftwood and repurposed aluminum poles. Wires snake from its roof to a solar panel perched nearby. On the side, a sticker shaped like a seal, giving a thumbs up. "This is my smart cellar," he announces with a grin, tapping the screen of his tablet. "See temps holding at 1. You peer inside the unit. It's lined with traditional materials: fur, moss, seal hide, but augmented with reflective insulation, a temperature monitor, and, incredibly, an old smartphone duct taped to the wall. "Camera," he explains, "so I can check if anything leaks." You raise your eyebrows. "Sometimes I just watch the fish," he adds, with a shrug that somehow combines pride and mild embarrassment. Around the village, you start noticing other adaptations. One family has added rubber gaskets, salvaged from vehicle parts, to the lids of their ice cellars, creating a better seal against meltwater. Another has replaced the traditional wooden lid with a composite panel, insulated with aerogel, the same stuff NASA uses in spacesuits. Bought it from a guy in Anchorage. The father says, "He thought I was building a rocket." Some have installed temperature loggers that sync with their phones. Not for show, just to get early warnings if something's warming too fast. And a few teens have even built apps to log the contents of various cellars, complete with fermentation timers, vent status, and smell check reminders. "We call it blubberboard," Tomic says, half laughing. "It's terrible, but it works." Historians are watching, too. A small visiting team has set up in one of the outbuildings, not to tell people how to change, but to observe how they're choosing to evolve. They're cataloging every tweak, every borrowed tool, every layer of moss laid beside synthetic foam. There's a quiet joy in watching old and new coexist, not a replacement, but a remix. In one corner of the village, a group of young adults is digging a new cellar, the traditional way, but with a twist. One person wields a curved antler shovel. Another holds a soil thermometer. A third is live streaming the entire process to a classroom in the city, narrating in 2 languages. This spot was tested with sonar last month. One explains to the camera: good frost depth, minimal groundwater intrusion. Also, there's a fox family nearby, which is either a good omen or a snack hazard. You can't help but smile. Not everyone loves the modern touches. Some elders worry about reliance on devices that might freeze, glitch, or just stop working. But even those with doubts admit the young people are trying with respect. They still dig. One elder says, "That's what matters." Respect shows up in other ways, too. In the local school, students are weaving sealskin wraps for cellar bundles, not because they have to, but because they want to. It's art class. One girl explains, but, like, practical. The wraps feature embroidered symbols, initials, even tiny GPS tags. If a bundle gets misplaced or buried in the wrong cellar, it pings a phone with a gentle blip. Lost and found. But for fish, Tomic jokes, even the feasts are changing slightly. Some dishes now feature a new style label, fermented in hybrid cellars, aged using modified methods. Taste test debates erupt regularly. The elders generally win, but the kids are holding their ground. One night, you watch a group sample slices of traditional dried meat, and a new version fermented in a steel container with pH monitoring. The difference is subtle. Texture, maybe. Salt absorption. One teen insists his method tastes cleaner. The elder beside him chews, nods, and says only, "Your fish has manners." And just like that, everyone laughs. These aren't replacements. They're returns to tradition, with slight modern detours. You walk with Tomic later as he checks the vent on a recently upgraded cellar. He lifts the moss plug, sniffs, nods. Still good. He murmurs, still thinking. You ask if he misses doing it the old way, without gadgets. He pauses, then shrugs. Sometimes. But I think we're just doing what they did, using what we've got. Listening to what works. Then he grins. Also, I like the fish cam. That evening, you sit with a group around a fire, watching aurora spill lazily across the sky. A baby squeals nearby. Someone's carving a new handle for a digging tool. Someone else scrolls through fermentation logs on their phone, and it all feels right. Not because it's perfect, but because it's alive. The cellars are still dug. The snow still packs. The ground still holds its breath. And the next generation, they're listening, building, laughing, digging differently, but digging just the same. You're walking alone now. Boots crunching over wind-hardened snow. The kind that squeaks like a whispered reminder that this place notices every step. The village is quiet behind you. A handful of chimney curls fading into a pale blue sky. Ahead, a row of low mounds dot the edge of a frozen lake storage cellars. Sleeping, you've been invited to visit one of the older cellars still in use. One that's said to hold more than just food. The owner, a soft-spoken elder named Nuka, greets you with a nod. She's wrapped in a heavy parka with a fur-lined hood, and her mittens are patched with fabric that doesn't match, but clearly means something. She leads you to her cellar, which sits apart from the others. Nestled against a slope the wind seems to avoid. "This one's been here longer than me," she says, kneeling beside the wooden hatch. Her hand brushes away a dusting of snow like she's wiping crumbs off a favorite old book. "My mother buried her first fish here, and her mother before that." She lifts the lid. The air that rises is impossibly cold, dense with the scent of earth, time, and a faint edge of salt. You follow her down, one careful foot at a time. Inside, the cellar is unlike any you've seen so far. There are bundles, yes, and carefully stacked parcels, but also trinkets, objects nestled in between the meat and fish. A feather charm, a small wooden carving, a folded piece of cloth that might be a baby's cap. These things keep memory close. Nuka says, when the smell of the food fades, the stories stay. She unwraps one bundle and holds it up to the low light of her headlamp. It's fermented seal, prepared by her husband over 2 decades ago. "We only eat it when everyone's here," she says, and only when the wind's right. You don't ask how the wind decides what's right. Instead, you kneel and inhale gently. The smell is rich, layered, not harsh, like old oil mixed with salt and a bit of northern patience. And somehow, it smells familiar, like something buried deep in your own brain. Even if you've never tasted it before, you never forget this smell. Nuka says, it clings to your coat. It hides in your dreams. And she's right. For the rest of the day, you catch whiffs of it on your gloves, in your scarf, in the space behind your eyes when you close them. It's not unpleasant, just persistent. Later, you join a few other villagers preparing bundles for storage. One young woman opens a jar and grimaces. Too soft, she mutters. It fermented sad. Apparently, that's a known category. Food that doesn't rot, doesn't spoil, but turns out too mushy, too bland, too quiet, like it forgot why it was buried. Someone adds, but not Nuka's. Her cellar holds the opposite. Her food remembers. In the evening, she invites you back inside, not into the cellar this time, but her home. She places a tiny plate in front of you, a paper-thin slice of aged fish, a dab of seal oil, and a few wild berries that have been dried until they taste like sunlight and leather. You eat slowly. It's sweet, salty, a little sour. But more than that, it tastes like a season, like late winter, like stories told in darkness and work done in silence. It tastes emotional. You try to describe it. Nuka just smiles. You've got the cellar in your mouth now. She says, it'll follow you. Later, you step outside, breath rising in a lazy spiral. The sky is ink dark and shimmering with starlight. Somewhere, a dog barks once, then goes quiet, and you realize that what lingers isn't just the taste, it's the feeling of depth, of time, of things kept cool, not because they're hidden, but because they're held carefully. That's what these cellars are. Not just refrigerators, not just pits. They're memory chambers. They preserve more than food. They hold smells, textures, names you only say when the fire's low and the room is full. They remind people who they were and who they still are. You take off your gloves and place your hand against the snow above Nuka's cellar, just for a moment. It's not warm, but it welcomes you all the same. And somewhere beneath your fingers, a fish is dreaming, slowly, richly, in seal oil and silence. You spend the early morning in silence, walking the same path the elders take to visit their cellars. No need to talk, no need to hurry, just footfalls, soft wind, and the occasional groan of snow settling under your weight. It's not really a trail, more like a suggestion carved by memory and boot soles. Today, there's no shovel in your hand, no thermometer, no samples to label. You're here to understand something that's been circling the edge of every lesson, the stillness. The part no science explains, but everyone seems to know. You stop beside an old cellar with no lid, no bundles, just a hollow in the earth, partly filled in, abandoned, but not forgotten. Someone has placed a feather in the middle, maybe for luck, maybe for mourning. You sit and you wait. The cold isn't cruel, it just is. And after a while, you begin to feel it differently, not as a force pressing against you, but as a quiet companion. The same way still water isn't boring, but deep. This, you're told later, is part of the rhythm. The waiting, the listening, the not doing. It's how people here know when the ground is ready, when the fermentation has done enough, when it's time to eat, or to leave the fish just a little longer. It's not intuition. Not exactly. It's a muscle you grow by spending enough time not asking for answers. Kiana joins you sometime mid-morning. She doesn't sit. She stands beside the half-buried cellar and watches the clouds. This one was my brother's. She says after a long stretch of silence, he used to talk to it, said it answered. Sometimes you smile, not sure whether to laugh or nod. So you do both. She taps the snow with her boot. We buried food here one winter and forgot. Thought it was ruined. But the next year, it came up better than ever. Tasted like patience. Historians still argue whether Arctic cellar traditions were rooted in scientific understanding or philosophical calm. But there's little doubt these practices are filled with meaning, and that meaning often arrives in stillness. You walk with Kiana to another cellar, one still in use. It's been 2 months since the last bundle was buried. She doesn't open it yet. Instead, she sits beside it and unwraps a small pouch. Inside dried leaves, a few bone charms, a folded scrap of cloth. I leave this here every spring. She says, so the cellar remembers what it's for. You don't ask what would happen if she didn't. Instead, you help her check the snowpack. You run your gloved fingers along the seal between lid and ground. Everything feels solid. The smell rising from the small vent hole is earthy, mild, promising, but she doesn't open it. Not yet, she murmurs. The quiet hasn't finished. Back at the gathering house, someone is carving a new charm for a cellar entrance. It's a small fox, curled up, eyes closed. A child watches, mimicking the movements with a stick in the snow. Another person is stitching a cloth for wrapping meat. The thread is uneven. The design strange, half tree, half fish, but no one corrects her. Whatever you wrap it with, someone says, is the first thing the meat sees when it wakes up. You hadn't thought of it like that before. Even tools are shaped by the rhythm. A digging paddle is polished smooth, not because rough ones don't work, but because smooth makes fewer thoughts while you dig. Fewer distractions, more time to feel the resistance of the earth, to know when you've reached the right depth. Without measuring, at lunch, a bowl of warm broth is passed around, made from slow-boiled bones and aged root vegetables. You sip it and feel something like rest spread through your arms. No urgency, no stimulation, just a body remembering what it's like to eat in rhythm with the land. Later, you visit a child's practice pit. It's only a foot deep. Inside is a rock wrapped in cloth, sealed with twine. They're learning not to bury food yet, but the act of burying, of waiting, of seeing what emerges. You crouch beside them and ask what they hope to find. They think for a moment, then whisper, "Maybe something I forgot I left." That feels like the most honest answer you've heard all week. As the sky begins its long fade into evening, you return to the half-buried cellar with the feather. No one's there now. You sit beside it, just breathing, listening. The wind picks up gently, but the snow doesn't shift. The cold is steady, and beneath you, buried deep, food is transforming at a glacial whisper, not asleep, not frozen, just becoming. You think of the phrase someone said earlier, "The cellar teaches stillness," and you realize how true it is, because in a world that races, that pushes, that chews and clicks and scrolls, this land invites you to pause, to wait, to let the fish finish dreaming before you wake it. The sky tonight is silver, not quite dark, not quite light, just resting in that soft in-between that the Arctic wears like a shawl in the shoulder seasons. The snow has gone quiet again, its surface smoothed by a gentle wind that feels more like breath than weather. The village is nearly still. You've seen what you came to see, but before you leave, there's one last place they want you to visit. They don't say why, they just point you there. It's a cellar, not one you've seen before. Built far from the others, tucked near the edge of a cliff where the land rolls downward into frozen sea. The slope around it is worn smooth, packed from decades of foot traffic. Yet no footprints mark the path today. You make the walk alone. The wind whistles a low tune as you approach. And even though you've opened more cellars in the past few weeks than you ever thought possible, this one feels different. Not heavier, just quieter. You lift the lid, inside emptiness. No fish, no meat, just shelves, smoothed wood, darkened with age. A small pendant hangs from the beam, a carved seal. Eyes closed. You step down into the space and feel the air settle around you. It's the coldest you felt all trip, and yet there's warmth in it. Not in degrees, in feeling. This is a memory cellar. Nuka told you about it earlier, but you hadn't understood then. A place not for food, but for preserving moments. Nothing physical. No camera, no writing, just stillness. Return to over and over until the cellar itself remembers for you. You sit on the ledge, your thoughts wander back to the first time you crouched over a steaming bowl of fermented char, unsure if your stomach would rebel. To the soft creak of a cellar lid rising after a fresh snow. To the taste of berries so sour they made your eyebrows retreat. To the jokes, the silence, the fish that moaned, the fox that stole a fermented boot, The little girl who swore her goose whispered recipes in its sleep. You don't talk. You don't write it down. You let the cellar hold it, because sometimes that's all a cellar is, a place to keep what matters from spoiling. What you want to come back to years later. When the world feels loud and fast again, you sit for a long while. When you finally climb out, you brush snow over the lid without thinking. Not to hide it, just to say thank you. You head back toward the village slowly. The light from the windows glows golden against the snow. Someone's cooking again. You smell smoke, oil, and a hint of elderberries boiled with seal fat. Inside, they've saved you a seat. You sit, you eat, you laugh, you listen. Later, as your eyes grow heavy and the fire draws low, you lie down on a bed of furs beside the seal oil lamp. Its light dances on the ceiling in soft waves. You've seen cellars collapse. You've tasted food older than your phone. You've smelled things you can't unsmell and learned the difference between almost ready and not yet. You've watched fish become stories. You've seen silence do the work of science. And now, you rest. You think of the cold not as something sharp, but something that remembers you. Beneath your feet, the earth holds 1,000 dinners, 1,000 stories, 1,000 whispered promises to wait, and you believe it. The cellar is closed. The fish is dreaming. So are you. So now, let's ease down together. You're warm now, tucked under soft blankets, or maybe just lying still, eyes closed. Somewhere quiet, the wind has settled, the lamp has dimmed, and the cellar, that old quiet friend beneath the snow, is gently exhaling its long, steady breath. The world outside doesn't need anything from you right now. Not your attention, not your thoughts, just your rest. You've walked snow paths, held ancient tools, tasted the cold as it transforms food into memory. You've learned that some things, like fermented goose or the perfect cellar depth, can't be rushed. That stillness has its own kind of wisdom, that sometimes the best flavor comes not from seasoning, but from waiting. Let your body grow heavier with each breath. Let the tension slide down your shoulders, over your arms, pooling gently at your fingertips and toes. If your thoughts wander back to snowy hills, to gently sleeping fish, let them drift like snowflakes across the landscape of your mind. You are not lost. You are preserved. You are wrapped in layers of stillness, safety, and snow. And just like the food below the frost, you are being held by the land itself, unchanged, unhurried, and completely at peace. Sleep now. The cellar will remember everything for you.